Hey, Gurz.
That's what we're going in a couple minutes. If you need to use the restroom or any of that, we get going through that. Get your last raffle tickets in and go in just a second. Can y'all hear me on the Zoom? Give me a thumbs up if you can.
What kind of thing are coral? Take a look at design of them. They're like the blue and white and the rest of that I have outside of my patio, but they're coral and blue and stuff like that. They're kind of big.
Guys, I don't have a microphone tonight, so I'm going to try to speak up a little bit. If you
Karen,
go.
Couch, but I think they're too big.
What?
Guys, if y'all get settled down, find your seat. We're going to get going. I should have brought my bullhorn with me. Yeah, look, I'm going to keep the introduction short and sweet. What about fishing reports? Let's get going with fishing reports. Who has thoughts to tell us tonight? Anybody been fishing in this fishing club? I've been fishing, but I haven't been catching. Got one over here.
One little male.
Stop that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
First of all, fish on the flat last week.
Oh, congratulations. First no fish. It's your first fish too, wasn't it?
First fish, first fish.
Congratulations. First. $30 a pound. 130 Yeah.
My name's Doug Brady, and I just joined the club. I determined that I would use this month to go to the beaches and try and figure out how to get there, get back, continue with my day. John was great help. Al gave me a killer fly. So I caught a couple snook. I got a lot of jacks and ladies. I see the target rolling way beyond me. It just has me dreaming of big things. But mostly it's been a lot of fun getting out there. I've run into some other fly rodders on the beach. No snook numbers that I've seen, but it's been just delightful. I think it's going to be a lot of fun here to learn more about the snook.
What beaches you going to?
The Bonus and walk all the way up to the island
Yeah.
and Turtle Beach. And CSP is the wall and go around the wall. I'm not sure what that's called. Those are the
Go out there on the ship.
great fun. There's always parking and stuff.
Well, I'm not quite there yet. I'm still looking for fishing reports. Oh, you're wrong. Anybody else? Joanne, tell us about what were you into a couple days ago?
Well, I got the pit bull bag, right? I mean, they're hard to find, and all of a sudden I just saw what looked like kind of mullet, but not jumping. So I just threw the middle of it, turned up, and it was just.
Nice.
Bull
So
bag.
Bull Bay, you're down south, 20th start.
I'm gonna get all this stuff.
All right. Do we have any new members tonight? Oh, they're everywhere. All right, we'll start right here. Stand up and introduce yourself to the club.
I am standing up. That's all I got. And I've caught this a lot of places, so I'm looking forward to doing it up here.
Welcome, Steve.
My name is Gurgler DeSantis. I live down in Englewood. My wife sent me here so I can get out of the
Good girl.
I'm here to learn all I can.
Nice. Welcome, welcome.
I just got here about 3 weeks ago.
Eric, welcome.
Strange, I was actually born in Florida and grew up over fishing on the Indian River for years. And then moved to Georgia, spent 3 years in prison for excessive fishing. But we've been down here quite a while on this coast and lost my fishing mojo and I'm getting it back. So,
Good deal. Good deal. Well, I'm studying.
Hi, I'm Alan Edson. I live in Sarasota. I've got 3 weeks. Imagery in Miami. No fish left in this thing there, I can tell you that. So I brought my boat over here and learn.
Awesome.
Hired about 11 months ago, moved down here about 10 months ago. From Staten Island, New York. Still looking for a bit of Italian food. Been a fisherman ever since I can remember. Fly fishing for the last few years. Fly fishing up in New York is maybe the most a year. This is a whole different world.
Welcome. Any visitors that aren't new members? Stand up and introduce yourself, Bill.
My name's Darren. This is Dallas, Texas.
Yeah.
I'm a freshman.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, welcome there. So, as many of y'all know, Steve Gibson passed here 4 weeks ago, and the board was talking about it. We wanted to do something to honor Steve and his legacy, especially to this club. Steve's one of the founding members of this club. I didn't get to meet Steve more than just a couple times here at meetings, but when I was researching moving down here, the two people I felt like I knew were Steve Gibson and Craig. And they put stuff out online and are a real good internet presence, and we're good ambassadors for this club. Steve was a writer, he was a kayak fish guide, he loved to go walk the beach for snook. And as a board, we decided to create an award that we're going to give to someone each October who exemplifies Steve's spirit, and that could be through teaching other members of the club or through being that person who goes out on the beach and finds the snook and tells everybody where they're at. Well, you don't tell everybody, but just me. Or, maybe you tie up a new fly. That's something inventive, like Steve tied the Mackerel minnow, which I think everybody in here has probably put one on the end of their line and gone down to the Everglades and done that. So anyway, we're gonna honor Steve's legacy by awarding that each fall. And I just want you all to be aware of that. There'll be more information coming out here in the next few days. We'll be doing that. So I want to thank you, Craig, for tying tonight. Thank you, Pete, for tying tonight. Thank you, Les, for tying tonight. Thank you, John, for the help table. Who else? Mike, running the show over there. JT, out on teaching people to cast. Gene for running our raffle. Ron for welcoming guests and signing up new members. And Bob for taking everybody's money. And if y'all don't know it, tonight's guest is Jacob Shields. Jacob's the owner of the compound, Boardshop, surf shop, fly shop. I think every one of us has been in there, and we have bought EP fibers at one time or another. If not 2 or 3 packs of them, maybe a couple packs of hooks, and this, that, and the other. He can't keep calling out of there. I don't know why. But Jacob's going to join us tonight. He does a lot in the community, a lot with the youth fly fishing in the community, a lot with the youth and the surfing, skimboarding, fly fishing, anytime we call Jacob and ask him to do something, he's all going to know. He just helped us put on a great show, the fly fishing film tour. I want to welcome to the podium Jacob Shields.
Thank you. Do me a favor, actually. I'm going to I should have done this before, but I'm going to give you guys like a few of these. Just pass these down. I was very on the fence about even doing this. It was, I figured at least something else you can kind of keep me on task. And at least you guys leave with something visible. Basically, it's just a little bit of an outline of kind of what I'm wanting to kind of go over. You guys. Basically, all this is just a lot of you that have done this for a really long time. A lot of you that have done this for a long time. Yes, sir. We'll look at this and say, well, yeah, of course, that's what you do. But I'm glad to know that there's actually some people new to the area and stuff like that, to where some of this information may be very useful for some of you. Some of you may not agree with some of what I say, and other of you may not need any help at all because you've been doing this a lot longer than I have. So hopefully we'll be able to walk away with a little bit of knowledge and maybe a different way of approaching fly fishing in this area and stuff like that. So firstly, thanks for the invite. I appreciate it. Thanks for including me and our business into a lot of what you guys do here. I think highly of the group. And as Ethan was mentioning, I send you guys my condolences regarding Your loss this last couple weeks. I know he was a very, influential guy in this area, and I've gotten to know him, Steve, over the years. Not really well, like some of you, but my first time meeting him is very tough guy to crack. His first time kind of checking out our shop and stuff, and over the years, I got to really get, fairly close with him and have some really good conversations with him. So I know there's a big void there in the community. So my condolences to you guys for that. So originally this conversation and topic for me was, geared towards snook, because this is the time of year that we get excited and start targeting snook on the beach. For those of you who do not know that are new to the area, snook is a species that you can target in this area all year long. You can find them technically, you can find them on the beach all year long, but in the summer, you're gonna have a lot more opportunities than you would say in January. There are certainly fish that hold over in the colder months on the beach side. I don't know specifically if they go deeper or if they just hold on darker structure, maybe rock bottom stuff on the beach, but you can find snook on the beach all year long, but I probably wouldn't waste your time necessarily targeting them in those really cold months. So I want to kind of go over a brief overview of beach fly fishing, and then kind of come back to the snook and the species that we would target in the summer. So for those of you who are unaware of this, you can fish from the beach all year long, right? So it doesn't have to be a summer thing. The problem with the winter time is we have a lot of cold fronts that come through, the wind will blow out of the northwest, the water gets churned up, it gets choppy, and it makes it harder. That doesn't mean you won't catch fish, it makes it a little bit more challenging. So we'll start with winter, and we'll kind of go through the different seasons of what you would potentially target, how you would target that, and then we'll kind of end in the bulk of the conversation being on beach snook and summer fishing from the beach. So in the winter, there's going to be some species that you certainly can catch different times of year that are not on this list, but this is predominantly what I found on the beach in the wintertime, would be jacks, some ladyfish, mackerel, some sheep's head, kind of a mixed bag, maybe a little bit of everything, but not one specific species to really go out and target. Go out there, maybe blind cast, and cross your fingers that you catch something. I would advise you, if you have the ability to target backwater fishing in the winter, that those backwater bays and creeks and stuff like that definitely fishes better in the winter. But if your only access is the beach, definitely it would be worth carrying a fly rod if you went for a walk on the beach. In the spring, we're kind of coming out of those colder months and starting to warm up a little bit. The water, typically, we don't get a lot of rain in the winter months, so the water in the spring gets really clean, starts to warm up, and the fish start to move around a little bit. So spring's definitely a good time to start targeting the beach. That time of year, you would be looking at potentially running into pompano, occasionally permit, trout, mackerel, ladyfish, jack, snook, occasionally false albacore, bonita, and sheep's head you'll find on the beach. So what I kind of want to focus on and talk about tonight is when you're walking the beach and you're targeting, I like to kind of go out with a goal in mind. If I'm walking the beach in spring, I may want to try to catch a sheep's head or a pompano because they're fairly prevalent and they're not around all year, or at least I don't find them all year. So I'd maybe target those species. And when doing so, for those of you that are coming from a trout background and stuff like that, it's not this science of matching the hatch where it has to be this exact fly and this exact size and this exact materials to have success. So, but what you do want to do is you really want to, if you're out to target, say, pompano, which is a really fun species that I feel like we don't probably target enough here from the beach because they do get, pretty good numbers and they're willing to eat a fly. I would have my fly selection really honed in on what the pompano would potentially want to eat. So for me, if I was doing that in the spring, I would fish a weighted shrimp or crab pattern. Not to say they wouldn't eat a bait fish that's not weighted, but I would try to get a fly that's going to get down a little bit deep in the water column because those fish have a tendency they want to eat down more than they want to eat up. So when I'm targeting them, I want to have a fly that I can present to them that will be below their eyesight or mouth when they approach it, right? So to me, fly selection and presentation to them and material choice and tie a fly is really important not so much on what the fly physically looks like, although that does matter. It's more so where in the water column is it, and does it resemble something that they would eat? Does it resemble a sand flea, a small crab, a shrimp, something like that? So it's going to be hard for you guys to see from there, but I did bring a few flies that are ones that I would potentially target, say a pompano or a sheep's head in the springtime. Your approach to those fish are going to be a little different than snook because the fly needs to get down. So a lot of times I'll lead them a little longer, and you're going to want to fish the fly off the sand a little bit more than suspending in the water column. Okay. So with that, we kind of go out of the springtime and we start going into the summer months when the water starts really heating up like it is right now, when a lot of those snook that in the winter months, snook need to be and they want to be warm. So the reason why there's not as many fish on the beach in the wintertime is they're going to move to the backwaters where there's darker bottom, like in your, the back bays, the muddy bottoms, the creeks, because those shallow areas of dark bottom warm up substantially faster than that deeper water does on the beach. So in the winter months, you're going to target them out there. As that water warms up, they're going to kind of move out of those areas in the backcountry and move out to the beach. Does that mean you can't catch snook in the backcountry in the winter? In the summer. The snook fishing can be great in the backcountry in the summer, but it's also really good on the beach side. So when we get into the summer months, that's when all of us kind of start to get excited. The weather's getting better. It's not as cold. The water's warming up. We know the fish are on the move. So spring and summer is when we really kind of kick into gear and start talking about snook on the beach, stuff like that. So I kind of want to go over summertime species to target. Then I'll go into fall, and then we'll circle back to summer. Right? So in the summertime, when you're walking the beach, you easily could obviously target snook would be the fish that I would probably target first and foremost. You could definitely come across trout, jacks, tarpon, a multitude of species from the sand in the summertime. When we go into the fall, we can continue to fish the beach side, and I've gotten almost to where I always get so excited for tarpon season and beach snook season because the weather's been crappy, work's been busy, and I want to get out there the first good day that I think the water's warm enough that there can be a snook crossing on the beach. Well, the problem with that is there might be one, but you could spend all day to find that one. So in those early months or the early weeks of spring, could you target those fish on the beach? Certainly you could, but you've got to really love it because it could be a really long walk for 1 or 2 shots, right? And a lot of us kind of give up once we get into August. It's hot. We've been walking the beach and target fishing. So we kind of almost give up on it because it's like, it's not summer anymore, fall's time. Well, for me, that August, September into October, if I were you, I would spend more time focusing on the back half of the season of what we would consider the season, opposed to those early months. Because those fish will hold over well into October, if not November, at least since I've been doing this, they have. And in those later months, you'll have equal good numbers of snook, but then you'll come across other species that you maybe wouldn't have other times of the year. Like the redfish will school up, and they will school up on the beach sometimes. Bottoms, anywhere there's structure that holds bait, they'll definitely get out there, and you'll have opportunities to catch snook in big numbers or in small groups, along with the snook. The redfish schools along with the snook. With that, once those crab pots go in and the tripletail around, I've had plenty of opportunities to side cast the tripletail from the sand. That's not a species that you hear a lot of people talk about from the beach, but it certainly can happen. So whenever you're setting out with an agenda in mind, I would always be prepared for that snook because that's what you're going for. But I would always have a little bit of a selection of flies for some of the other stuff that you may run into. So in that fall time, redfish, snook, there's still tarpon out there. The albies start to move in. The tripletail happens, some mackerel. So, if you fished in September and October on the beaches here, I feel like you've got about as good a shot as any time of year to catch any species that we target on a fly rod in this specific area. So I just wanted to kind of not only talk about this thing, but kind of let you know that if you don't have a kayak or a paddleboard or a skiff or can't afford a guide, The beach is there's public access, and there's species and something to target all year long, and most of those are noteworthy fish worth pursuing out there. So that's kind of a basic general zone of beach fly fishing. Now I'm going to kind of try to go into more of the details of tactics, how, when, why, that kind of thing. So the main focus tonight, as we said, is snook in the summertime. So I get a lot of questions about flies, fly lines, fly rod weights, all kinds of stuff. So I just kind of want to take the approach of breaking it down of what we do and why do we do it. So for me, is the right line for beach snook fishing an intermediate tip line? That's a very debatable question. If I were to say, who thinks that an intermediate tip line is the right line for beach snook here? One person. There's a handful of people that do. There's a lot of customers that do think it's the right line, and I don't disagree with them. I think it's a great line. There are times that it's the perfect line, but then there's other times that it may not be the perfect line. So if you have the ability to make your selections of stuff based on your availability to fish, like if you're someone that only gets to fish 1 day a week and the weather is obviously variable, I think an intermediate line is great because there's a good chance the day that you're going, if you can only go 1 day a week, your 1 day off, it's going to be windy, it's going to be a little lumpy, it's going to be a little bit cloudy in the water. And an intermediate line is an advantage. And the reason that is because it's not so much that you need a line to get really deep for beach snook because they're in a foot or 2 foot of water maybe. But a lot of times, as you've noticed, if you've done it with a floating line, you'll cast out there. And mind you, you're casting typically from the sand, not really even getting your feet wet, maybe a little bit of lapping water up on your feet. You don't want to be wading out to fish in most beaches. You want to be kind of back off where the water's kind of lapping up, so fishing the trough. And you're throwing a floating line with a subsurface non-weighted fly and it's wavy and rolling, you're not really getting a good presentation to fish because the line, as that wave rolls up, it's moving the fly and it may be moving it in a rate of speed or in a water depth that's different than you're wanting to fish it. So an intermediate line is going to kind of help cut through that wave, and a weighted fly is going to help that fly get down to where when you're stripping it, you're really connected to the fly substantially more than you would be with a floating line. So, yes, sir. That's it, and thank you for clarifying that. I rarely would recommend a full intermediate line. I'm referring to a floating line with an intermediate tip. Yes, sorry about that. There are times for full intermediate lines as well. The thing I don't like about full intermediate or full sinking lines, for what I like to do is, say you do have this and you do have a fish in your sights and you are sight fishing a snook or red or whatever it may be. And if you're anything like me, you butcher half of your shots or more, right? And you're off the fish, horrible shot, and you need to pick it up and you need to go again. It is really hard to pick up a full intermediate line once it's landed because the whole line is starting to drop. So you've got to strip everything back, and by that time, your opportunity is getting less and less and less and less to get a good presentation of fish. Whereas if you have a floating intermediate and you lay it out there, the tip is starting to drop it around 1.5 inches or so, an inch per, every 2 seconds or something like that. To where if it is a horrible shot, you can easily pick it back up similar to a floating line and go again without having to strip everything in. And in the sight fishing world, if you're doing a lot of that, the first shot's always the best one, but if you have to strip it all in and go again, you're almost out of the game 90% of the time if I had to guess. So that's why I prefer not a full intermediate or full sink tip. There's a time and place for it. Yes, sir. There's advantages to both. When the conditions are really good and it's not super wavy and lumpy, I truly prefer not having one. But how many days are the conditions perfect? It's pretty rare. So in those lumpy, swelly conditions, a stripping basket definitely gives you a good advantage. I'm a firm believer in that first shot counting when it comes to sight fishing with a fly rod. So anything that you can do for that first presentation to be the best one, your odds go substantially up and a stripping basket tends to help with that. So, and mind you, JT, feels comfortable enough to ask if as we go through this, I don't want to keep this all night, but I am more than happy to answer questions as we go through this conversation. So if you don't forget the question or we get to the end of it or something like that. So if you do have questions like that, I'm more than happy for you guys to ask. Because there's going to be some stuff I forget. So that being said, when it's lumpy and rolly and wavy, I think an intermediate tip, floating intermediate tip line is a great choice. I think a little bit of a weighted bait fish pattern is a great choice. However, when we get into the summer months, our pattern typically goes to being offshore in the morning. So offshore, as a surfer, offshore means when the wind is blowing from the land out to sea is offshore. So here that's an east wind, a southeast wind, or a northeast wind on most of our beaches. So in the summer months, traditionally in the morning, you're going to have pretty glassy conditions a lot of time. So for me, if you're fishing floating lines, which I like to do floating, I like to fish floating lines, morning is a good time to target snook on the beach because there's a good chance that the wind's been offshore all night and the beach is going to be very calm and glassy. And fortunately for us, we have the sun rising in our east so that we have pretty good viz at a pretty early time in the morning before the crowds get up there. So for me, targeting beach snook in the summer, it's an advantage to get out there early. Not that you have to be there at sunrise, but to me, early on the beach is like 7:30, 8 o'clock as that sun's getting up before the crowds get there. You have a good chance of having pretty good conditions with pretty good light without a lot of people. So I get questions all the time in the shop, like, what's the best place to go? And that's a very loaded question. So snook on the beach, they can hold in areas, but they certainly can swim back and forth just like tarpon do. So the right place on the beach on Sunday could have been Longbow Key, and you can go back there on Monday and those fish have moved because they have tails. So I don't really get honed in on what's the best spot. I would more focus on what's the best approach when you have a shot, because they do move, and your technique, if you know what to do when you do find them, you don't really have to have one specific place that holds them all the time that you go back over and over and over and over again. Okay, so for me, I would go with a floating line in the mornings when it's calm. If you work in the mornings and you have to fish the afternoon when the sea breeze picks up, usually in the summer months it'll stay offshore until around 11 to 1, and then the wind cranks around typically to the northwest. The conditions change a lot. Your viz gets harder. The sun starts to get lower. The wind's blowing in your face. You can certainly still catch fish, but it gets harder because you're casting into the wind. You have more glare. The water gets a little bit more milked out. So if you were to ask, I think the morning time in the summer would be the ideal time. Yes, sir.
Well, wait,
It's an excellent question. So the right weight line on those slicked out, greasy, calm summer mornings, for me, it could be a 6-weight. It could be the perfect rod. But when that northwest sea breeze kicks in and it's blowing 15 to 20 and you're trying to punch one into the wind, the 6-weight's not the right weight. So for me, I would say for beach snook, if that's predominantly what you're doing, I would say the ideal rod would probably be a 7-weight for beach snook, maybe an 8. But there are times that I love fishing my 6. So there's not, to me, there's not like a, I think you could ask 4 people and they could all say something different. I would say for me, it would be between a 6 and an 8 in that range. A 9's probably a little overkill for me, although there's times it would be appropriate. But I would say a 7 kind of lands in the middle, and that's what I would, fish a lot. And that's also a great rod for wintertime red fishing and stuff like that. The rods have gotten so fast and stiff now that a 6-weight, like if you get a really fast action 6-weight, for me it feels like an 8-weight because they have so much power compared to what they used to have. So you can scale down your rod weights a little bit. So, yes.
Line, what are you in time you're at a fly out? What tip are you in?
It's a really good question. So that varies. Me personally, I rarely would fish the beach with less than 20-pound fluorocarbon on the bite. I would rarely fish it with less. There are times that maybe I would just to get a bite if the fish are finicky. But I typically would start off with, say, a 20-pound tapered monofilament leader with a 25-pound fluorocarbon bites of it is what, that's kind of my go-to. If the water gets milky, I would certainly not be scared to up that to 30-pound. If the water is gin clear like it has been this spring, there may be a day that I'll go down to 16 just to feed one and know that I've got low odds of landing. But I would say on average, I'd be at that 20, 25-pound tippet. With Snook, I would definitely, you know, there's arguments to this. I've had good success with fluorocarbon. Some people think, you know, the monofilament products are equally as good, but that Yozuri, the Yozuri pink fluorocarbon, I've had probably the best success with that. Again, some people like Ford, some people like Chevy, but I'm a fan of the Yozuri fluorocarbon products. The price isn't, it's less than a lot of the other brands as well. Not that it's cheap by any means, but it's good stuff. And I'll fish that from bonefish all the way to beachside tarpon. And for whatever reason, I really like the pink color. So, was there another hand up? Yes, sir.
This is an online question. You're standing water's edge pretty much, right? Fishing morning, shadow, right?
It certainly can. 100%. You want to keep that in mind. Certainly, there's some spots. You know, everything changes and the beaches change and the bottoms change. But there's some spots in the past to where if I'm seeing a lot of fish and I'm walking, if I'm walking, it's hard to tell if something's moving when you're moving, right? So there's times if I'm not seeing anything, I don't have anything that looks like a fish, and I haven't seen a fish in half a mile, I'm just going to keep walking. But if I've got a day where there's fish swimming, there's fish moving constantly, I almost take a step back and I stop walking and I just sit and I wait. And I catch more fish sitting and waiting, whether it be on the skiff or on, you know, for tarpon on the beach or snook in the backcountry, even on the skiff or walking the beach, than I do moving. Because when you're moving, you get distracted. Does that mean to stay in the same spot all day and just hope a fish swims? No. But if I'm spooking fish and I'm missing fish because I'm on the move and there's fish that are also on the move, I would much prefer to step back near a tree or a shadow line somewhere and just absolutely observe that little stretch of water in front of me. Because the more you study, let's just say you're studying from that corner of the building, that corner of the building. If you've been here for 5 minutes and you're studying it and you're watching it, and there's some color over here that looks like a snook, and it hasn't moved, and you cast at it 4 times when you first got here, and it's not a snook, then you know when something else shows up, right? And there's a good chance if it wasn't there a second ago and it's there now, that it's something that you want to throw at. So I'm a big fan of taking, that's what I love about fly fishing. Take your time, slow it down. Like learn little stretches of water at a time so that you know what's there. I mean, it's tarpon fishing out here. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I'll be sitting there standing on the push pole or something, and there's, you know, fish often do not look like fish. They look like a subtle bit of color 2 feet below the water surface. It could be a light colored seaweed. It could be a limestone rock. It could be a lot of things. But if you're sitting and waiting and not moving, you'll start to learn which ones have been there for a while and which ones haven't. And I can't tell you, I mean, I've done this, you know, off and on for a really long time. And there's still times where I'll be staked out sitting there and stuff. I say they grease me. When I feel like it's a fish and it's the same thing I've been looking at for 3 hours, and it'll still trick you. And that's when you're standing there staring at it. So when you're moving, it's very easy to miss a fish or be casting at stuff that you think is a fish that's not. So I would, you know, recommend taking a step back and slowing down a little bit, for sure. When it comes to approaching, you know, the cast and stuff like that, I mentioned you want to be back off the water's edge a little bit. You don't want to be in that knee-deep water right off the little, you know, everybody that's in the beach is that little trough, right, that kind of drops off that you kind of take the step down into. Fish like those little, you know, those little areas like that. Little food gets churned up there, bait holds in there. So very oftentimes you're looking a lot, especially newbies to beach snook fishing, you're looking out where that pagoda is or whatever that thing is out here, and the fish is right here. And I do the same thing when I go chop fishing. I'm double hauling to a trout and I cast it over 30 in all these little seams because I don't know what I'm doing, you know? So it's almost the opposite. You want to scale back and you want to fish, you know, pretty tight to you. Does that mean that you don't need to be able to cast hard? Not necessarily, because you almost want to be looking down the beach. You're never really, say, if you folks are the ocean, I'm rarely standing here just looking for this fish to come out from the depths. I'm looking for the fish to come from the north or from the south. And oftentimes, not always, oftentimes, when you first get to the beach, if you were to throw a leaf or even your fly or something in the water to see which way the current's going, let's just say it blew northwest hard last night and the current's, slowly drifting from the north to the south. If the fish are not on the move and they're staged up and they're just chilling in the trough, there's a very good chance that their nose is facing to the north. So if that's the case, I would target my walk to the north so that you're walking up behind them instead of walking straight to them. It's just like trout fishing. I don't know a lot about trout fishing, as I just mentioned, although I do love it. My understanding of trout fishing is you're not really troughing down river where the fish are looking up at you. You're always working up the river so that you're kind of stealthy or coming up behind them. It's the same thing with snook or reds or pretty much any species here for that matter. Does that mean that they're not going to be swimming back and forth in with and against the current? Possibly. But those little small fry baits and the little glass minnows or the white baits, if there's a current, chances are that current's slowly drifting those fish down the beach and the snook are waiting there to kind of ambush them. So that would be my approach. See which way the current's going and then kind of walk, towards that, looking for snook to be facing whichever direction that is typically. And you'll see, you have the little trough and you'll see these little sand spits, depending on where you go. It could be sand spits or it could be a creek mouth or a little structure. Any little change in the terrain to me is an area to target, just like any other species. It holds a little bit more bait and there's a good chance, to me, there's a little bit better chance for their snook to be holding in a deeper hole beside a little sand spit opposed to just that long, straight stretch of sand. You're going to find them in both, but I think your odds are you're going to find more in those areas where the water can be a little bit more turbulent. There's a little bit more depth change and stuff like that. Yes, sir.
So you're going to walk up behind this one, cast in front of them, and let your bait come to them.
That is if they're staged up and not swimming. So that's a tricky shot because the fish is sitting still. The fly needs to be on that side of them, and the fly line's got to be on this side of them. So it's a tricky deal. When it's calm and slick and stuff like that, in a scenario like that, I would maybe increase my leader length a little bit to give you a little bit, maybe I would go from a 9 or 10 foot leader to a 12 foot leader, just so you don't overcast them, because sure enough, they don't want to see that fly line. As long as the fly line lands on this side of them and the fly lands on that side of them, you've got a pretty decent presentation. It's not ideal. Ideally you'd have a fish swimming towards you like this. You lay the fly here and you just cross them. That's to me the ideal shot, but you can certainly catch snook by having the fly kind of coming down the current line, just like a lot of the other baits are. But the key is the fly line being on one side and the fly being on the other, which for anybody is challenging. So, any other questions about that as far as like approach and cast and presentation to them? Because that's something that, that's something to me that matters a lot more than anything else. So I have a lot of customers that come in the shop. A lot of you guys, you're looking for material and it has to be this one set material because that's the way the fly's made and it's got to be this exact color. And I think that stuff matters a lot. But to me, what matters the most is having a fly that's going to be where the fish wants to eat it the most. So for me, there's times where for a snook, that could be a gurgler that's on the surface like a dry fly would be. And because those snook, their eyes are up here and they're always looking up to eat. They're much more willing to come up and eat something than they are to go down and pick it up off the bottom, typically. Whereas a redfish or a pompano or a sheep's head is almost the complete opposite of that. They're built and their mouths are made in a way that that's why, you don't see snook tailing a lot. You see redfish tailing a lot because they're down in the dirt eating and their tails are up in the air. So for redfish, my approach is always have a fly that's going to be, granted, do they eat gurglers and live fish, floating flies for redfish? Certainly. But I have a lot more odds feeding a redfish, whether it be on the beach or in the backcountry, if the fly is underneath him before he approaches it and it comes up off the bottom, opposed to fluttering down in front of his face. So with snook, it's the opposite. With tarpon, it's the opposite. They want to come up to eat. So I always want my snook flies to be at eyesight or above on a snook. There are times that snook will be grinded on the bottom, swimming deep. Maybe they're spooked or something. In those scenarios, I have no problem throwing a weighted fly like a white clouser or something that has some weight to get it down. But I still want it to be at his mouth height or above. If I had my choice, that's what I would prefer. So that's why I say when, what, and why. There's a time that a 12-foot, 20-pound leader is appropriate for beach snook, and that's because you're having to cast past them, pull to them. There's another time of the day that you may know there's 100 snook in this little trough, and it's 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the wind's blowing northwest at 15, and the water's milky, and at 8-foot, 40-pound leader's fine for that scenario, because it's not going to change anything. It's going to turn over easier in the wind, and you're just blind casting a bigger bait fish fly through some cloudy water, hoping you find one. So the right thing really is contingent on your technique of how you want to target it, when you're going to target it, and that kind of thing. So with that, yes, sir.
All right, I've got 3 questions.
Of course.
If I can say it. The first one, the Comus Beach, a lot of people go there, they work to Case the Key, there's lots of people. I had it in a day where there was a shower, and this person is kind of rooting around in the trough, and I walk 5 feet, she walks 5 feet. I walk, what the hell do you do? Snap her.
You're asking the wrong guy. Nothing.
I get ahead of her to catch up. And she's,
Yeah.
spook everything. So that was one.
I would say, depending on which direction they're walking, odds are that if they're walking north, I wouldn't be behind them because they've been there, right? So I would beeline it a few hundred yards above her and continue working that way. And then as she catches up to you, maybe you miss a stretch of beach because you're having to speed walk to stay in front of her, but I would much prefer not to be behind her.
You're very good. Second question. Turtle Beach had a reconstruction a year or 2 ago. I know it kind of got crappy for snook fishing. Has that changed since everything's settled down?
That's a great, I don't really have a true honest answer to it. The last time, I haven't fished turtle this year. The last time I did fish it though, it was actually good. It was just completely different than it had used to be for me. In the past, it would be a game of just walking and finding one. Whereas that was when I was talking about one of those spits that come out or whatever you want to call it. It got these really drastic little hooks down the beach the last time I had fished it, which is probably last summer, if I had to guess. And each one of those little nooks and coves, there was a deep little finger in every one of them on one side. It wasn't necessarily always consistent on one side, but that's where I found them almost every time, is where that deep little finger off that sand spit met the deeper water off to the side of it. And anything in between, I would never see it there.
The third thing is a comment on Gurgler fishing. So I typically, when I go on my kayak, I've got a rod set up with a full mono leader and tip it, because the fluorocarbon sinks.
Right.
So the fluorocarbon, trying to work a top water, ends up drowning the Gurgler because they don't weigh, they're not like plastic bombers. So I would use it with the same tip. I always have a second rod. Right? I don't think I've ever fished Gurglers or something.
You can. So in the fall, I've had it where they're really honed in on the little fry baits. And there's so many, I don't know if you guys have been out there where they're little glass minnows or whatever. And there's so many of them. It's like, how in the world is the fish going to eat your fly when there's a billion of these things? I mean, it'll be black with them, and there'll be a little hole in the middle from where the snook is. And you can't get them to eat your little glass minnow that looks just like every other bait that's in there to save your life, because there's 1,000 things in it. Throw a small white Gurgler. And it almost looks like an injured one of them, which is the easier target for the snook. And I've fed them on it before. Now, in those scenarios when there's that much bait around, the fishing can be very tough because there's plentiful food. But I've had them eat small white Gurglers in those scenarios. It's just like on the East Coast. We don't get it so much here, but on the East Coast, I've got some buddies that live and fish over there, and they get the mullet run. Sounds so exciting because you have thousands and thousands of just balls of mullet coming down the beach, and there's jacks and sharks and tarpon and snook just going ballistic on it. Good luck getting a bite in it. I mean, it is so hard because there's thousands of mullet, and then you got to have them find your fly in thousands and thousands of mullet. So here, in a little scenario like that, I'd be casting right into the meat of all that and hope to get a bite. Over there, it's like the game is opposite. You want to be on the full outside edges of it to where you got that lone, you know, if you're going for tarpon in the mullet run, you're throwing maybe a bigger meat, you know, mullet pattern or something, but you want to be fishing the outside of it so that that one fly stands out different than everything else to where it might be a little bit easier target for them. I would use that same approach here in those kind of, that's when I would use like a Gurgler for them.
And then with Albies, again, they fall on the bait, and then if you go in the middle, it's more difficult to catch an edge.
Yeah, so I would definitely, you know, and a lot of times when you're having a hard time finding a snook on the beach, I think you can find fish whether there's bait there or not. I've found fish when I haven't seen bait in a long time, but if you are seeing areas that are holding more bait than others, chances are the fish are going to be behind that, following that down the beach. So definitely keep your eyes out on those little, you know, greenback schools or glass minnow schools or the fry bait, and odds are you're going to have, you know, a little bit more life around that than a dry stretch of beach, for sure. So when we talk about that fly selection and Gurglers and stuff like that, so I want to kind of break down a little bit of what's the right fly to use and when is the right time to use it. So I don't fish personally for snook a lot of weighted flies because, as I mentioned, I want the fly to be above them, and if it's weighted, it's hard for me to know if it's getting below them or not. So I usually will fish suspending bait fish patterns, typically white ones, without any weight on them, that it is subsurface, but it's gonna take it a long time to get down below them. That's what I've had probably the most success with. But when it's lumpy and swelly, that fly goes up and down with the current, and it's almost staying too high for them. Even though it's not a floating fly, the current and the floating line is going to keep it high. So in those scenarios is when I would maybe throw a clouser or wrap a little lead around the head of it just to help get it down a little bit. When you're fishing the milky water, like after a storm, or if we have some swell and it gets churned up, you can certainly still catch snook in that, and you're going to have a hard time seeing them. So when you can't see them and you're just kind of hoping that they're there, that's when I would increase my fly size, and that's also when I would increase my flash. Did you have a question, sir?
No.
Okay. So when the water's pristine like it has been, it's very clean, I almost prefer, if any flash, it's incredibly minimal when the water's clean. But when the water's milky and dirty, I like a little bit more flash. And when the water's clean and you can see the fish really well, I prefer throwing smaller. I still throw bait fish patterns, but I throw smaller ones. And the reason, my theory in that, and the reason I choose to do it that way is not because, I mean, I've caught a 20-inch snook on a tarpon fly that's this big before. I mean, they'll eat it, but it's a lot harder to get a good presentation and a good cast and have a soft landing on a big meat fly like that in gin clear water that's slicked out and greasy calm than it is a size 4 little small white bait fish fly that's going to land real soft. So for me, I kind of pick my fly according to what the conditions tell me, not even so much what the species is. If I'm targeting snook, it's going to be a bait fish pattern, but on those days that it's really calm and clean and the fish are finicky, it's going to be a 2-inch bait fish fly with no flash on it. It's kind of sparse, that'll land soft to where you can trick them with it. You know, if it's muddy or churned up and choppy, I have no problem throwing a 2-aught big bait fish fly in white or even a different color, so it's easier for them to find it. Yes, sir.
Jacob, do you go dark when it's muddy?
A lot of people do. When I'm tarpon fishing, I definitely do. When I'm snook fishing, I've naturally always stuck with white with more flash on it, but I've caught beach snook with black flies before. And me personally, now my time is so limited in the last 10 years, when it's milky and choppy, I'm just working, to be honest with you, to where I'm gonna pick and choose to where, like, if I'm gonna go beach snook fishing, I wanna watch the fish see it and react to it, eat it. So I'm personally not doing that a lot. But from my experience in the past is I would much prefer you go a different color in that scenario, probably than when it's gin clear. Not to say they wouldn't eat it when it's gin clear too. I've had them eat a ton of different colors, but white is, you know, a really strong color, especially when the water's clean. So,
Can you talk about structure?
I'm sorry?
Can you talk a little about structure? I fished, I'm from near Anna Marie Island, and I
Okay.
fished the tip and the turn up there. And in fact, I was talking to Steve one day because I had terrible luck. And he said, how long have you been fishing it? I said, about an hour. He says, what have you seen? I said, well, I've been throwing flies up there, but I haven't seen anything. He said, then move.
Yeah.
And he was saying that there wasn't any structure there. Can you
Right.
talk a little bit about the structure you look for?
Of course, yes, sir. So when I'm talking structure, I'm talking anything from rock piles, pilings. Truthfully, I'm even considering sand and bins and holes and stuff like that, little channels. I consider all that as somewhat like structure because it's depth, it's water depth change, and it's something to create and disrupt the flow of water and that, as well as protection for species. So naturally, bait congregates around structure more often than it congregates just on a straight bit of sand. So if there is structure, the problem that I found is there's not a lot of places that have structure that don't have a lot of people. The jetties have a lot of people, so if you can find structure without a lot of people, there's a good chance that it's holding bait. And if it's holding bait, there's a good chance that it's holding snook. But when I was talking earlier, when you're walking the beach or doing whatever you're doing, if you're not seeing absolutely anything and you're watching, you have good conditions and you're not missing them, keep walking. But if you do find a spot that's structure and it is holding fish, stand and fish it for a while. My personal experience, and everybody here could have a different one for sure. I'm not so personally concerned about like rock structure or trees or protection on beach snook in the summertime, but I have found later in the season, as the water starts to cool down a little bit more, they seem to congregate on that stuff and stick to it a lot more so on the back half of the summer. As we get into the colder months, I think it's a lot more important to be looking for structure.
Okay, so I'm wasting my time if a beach is pretty sandy only, and I should be walking more looking for structure.
I wouldn't say you're wasting time, but if you've ever, it really depends. I mean, there's times where whether I'm snook fishing or tarpon fishing or whatever, that it could be slow for hours. And then it could be an incoming or it could be an outgoing, and it might not be the same 2 days in a row. But there's a time where if there's fish in that zone, there's a time that they swim. And sometimes you're just not there when they're swimming, and that's just bad luck. But then there's other times where you could have stood in that same spot that you're referring to for 4 or 5 hours, and before you know it, dude, here comes a train of fish one after another, and you just happen to be there when it happened, you know? So I don't think that you're necessarily doing anything wrong by any stretch, but for me personally, when it comes to snook, I'm on the move because there's oftentimes they're swimming, and there's other times where you don't see a fish for a mile, and then there's 30 just kind of laid up in one little spot together. And if you weren't walking down the beach, you would have never found those and had that chance. So to me, the best way to catch fish is to get the fly in a reasonable presentation in front of as many of them as you can. And that's just gonna up your odds. So if you're not having anything to cast at, I would keep moving until you eventually find something to cast at. Yes, sir. Did anybody else have a question? Any questions kind of regarding that or in that same vein of that? I don't know the whole fall, my theory of the fall stuff. I don't know if it's the water's getting cooler and that stuff heats up faster or what, but in the fall months, September, October, November, I do say if you're going to spend some time on the beach, I would try to pick and choose spots that have a little bit more bottom, darker bottom, stuff like that. seems to have produced for me better than just an open stretch of, say, siesta key public beach. So.
What would be your ideal conditions, and how would you know? You're saying you only have a limited set of time.
Sure. So it's honestly, it's a curse. So now it's like this with surfing and fishing. Now there's a lot of beach camps that, for me, like there's times where, like for example, this week, I've got to work every day this week, and I have probably a 3-hour window one day this week that I can go out and target fish, let's say. And if I pull up a beach cam and I can tell that I'm not going to be mobile and push pull, and it's going to be really sloppy, and I know that the winds are going to be calm on Thursday, I'm probably going to use that visual tool to tell me, you know what, maybe today's maybe not the day for me. That being said, if I had the time and the accessibility to do it, I would fish every chance I get, because some of the most epic days are when the conditions are not epic. I mean, so just for me, for sight fishing and stuff, I want the water to be as clean as it can be. And, you know, it's not that I mind wind, I just want viz. Viz matters to me way more than wind. So I would rather go out on a sunny day for beach snook fishing with wind than a cloudy day with no wind. Because on a cloudy day, it's so freaking hard to see. So, any other questions in that vein? One thing that I want to talk about briefly, and I don't know how we are on time right now. Oh, it's about time. There, you know, we talk in the summertime. We talk about snook because that's the predominant species that we like and stuff. But I've heard people say, "Oh, you can't catch tarpon from the beach" or something like that. It's done on the East Coast a lot. The fish on the East Coast tarpon will swim much closer and tighter to the beach than what we have here. But that being said, if tarpon is a fish, like to me, that's like one of the coolest fish we have here. I love it. And this time of year, they're here in pretty good numbers. And if you don't have the accessibility to have a skiff or a good kayak or a paddleboard or something like that, or craft to get you to them, there are times that you could feed tarpon from the sand just like a snook. So if that's something that you have interest in, if that's something that you would, you know, it's going to be really hard to land them. It's hard to land them from a boat. It's going to be really hard to land them from the shore. But if you had the right flies with you, there are times on incoming tides that those fish will swim incredibly tight to the beach. And if you're ready for it, you could have multiple shots in a day from the beach. I mean, I haven't got my hands on them from the beach, so I've jumped a good number of fish from the beach. To where that is something that if you have interest in it, and you don't have a boat, down the front of the boat or whatever, I wouldn't discourage you from targeting tarpon from the sand, other than go in with the expectation of, you know, being able to break them off, because it's a battle from the sand. Like on a boat, you know, you can run up on top of them, get some leverage on them. If they run you out 250 yards, I mean, it's not good for you or the fish. So I would do it in the hopes of feeding one, jumping them, and maybe popping them off. But it's certainly doable. And if I didn't have a boat, I would certainly be out there doing it that way if I had the chance. Yes, sir.
So my question is, a couple years ago, it was kind of a big we could go out of that.
I did it a lot so for my first 5 years of tarpon fishing on a fly, I did it on a paddleboard. That's all I had. I didn't have a skiff. I did it on the paddleboard, and it was really tough. And I learned a ton about tarpon in 5 years. The things that I would say to you about targeting on a paddleboard or a kayak would be either have a really light class tippet break section in your leader if you're fishing by yourself. I would say that. And in an ideal scenario, have someone else with you that, for me, the faster you can land that fish, the better, right? Better for you, better for them. So for me, let the fish run once or twice with fairly tight drag, crank down on them, get them right to you, and just put the absolute most heat on them you can. And while you're doing that, have your buddy be dragging you to the beach, so that by that time, he's jumped a couple times, you put a lot of heat on him already, and you can land them substantially faster at that stage from the beach than you could from your kayak. They can pull you on that kayak or paddle. I mean, I've done it, and they will pull you as long as you'll rinse them. It's brutal. So that's why I like the idea of let them jump 2 or 3 times, pop them off, or after those first couple of runs and jumps, try to get to the beach as fast as you can, just so you can put more leverage on it. And I think if you do it, hands down, have be anchored up like you're talking about, have a release fall, so when you hook up, you can unhook, and definitely have something to put the brakes on. I usually let them run 2 times and jump or whatever, and then I throw I use on a paddleboard with the fly line, I use a bucket, a 5-gallon bucket. It's like a shipping bucket, and I have a surfboard leash that's connected to my ankle, so I literally can just kick the bucket over off the board and fight them, and that way if the hook pulls, I'm connected to the bucket, so I just pull it back to me, and I'm not scrambling backwards trying to get to the sea anchor or bucket. But it can certainly be done. And I will tell you this, if you do that, that's kind of probably a totally different night, but my opinion of that style of tarpon fishing is you're going to want to throw, like in that scenario, I'm throwing, bigger flies than what I would throw on the flats for them, just because your viz on a kayak is not that of one that's somebody on a pulling platform. So you want to fly that when you're stripping through a meatball of tarpon, you want to fly that they have good odds of finding it, feeling it, or seeing it, opposed to when you're sight fishing a single up on a flat, it's hard to throw that big 6-inch bait fish pattern really accurately and land softly to one single fish. That's when you scale down the fly and you're throwing small toads and some of the other a little bit more technical kind of flies. But on the beach out there, I would throw this big kind of EP looking bait fish patterns and stuff like that. But I had more success in that realm using an intermediate line for sure. I think if you use a floating line out there, you'll definitely hook some fish, but I think you'll hook more fish with an intermediate tip, definitely. Yeah, I would, just because how many times do you see tarpon coming? You think you know where they're at, so you lay it out and you lead them and you're stripping, and all of a sudden they pop up right here and you're out again. Whereas if you do have a floating line with an intermediate tip, as long as you don't have 80 feet out, you can pick it up and go again sometimes with a full immediate. There you go. That's probably as much time as I should allow. Does anybody have any other questions about any of that stuff? Yes, sir.
I have one question. Talked about lines, talked about flies. What about leaders?
Okay. I would say, my go-to beach snook leader would be 20-pound mono with 25-pound fluoro that's about 10 feet long. When I'm fishing snook, like say in the Everglades, this is a beach topic, so I won't go into great detail, but snook in the Everglades could be totally different. If you're blind casting mangrove lines and where you basically banging bushes, 4 strips, you pick it up, 4 strips, and you just keep banging, then I'm going to probably shorten it up a lot, maybe an 8-foot leader, make it heavier because it's not going to really matter, and just be banging the bushes. Where on the beach, you need a little bit more lean, the water's cleaner. Now, if it's really muddy and it's really windy, I would shorten it and certainly not be scared to put a little bit heavier tippet on it, but I would shorten it up some. When it's real calm and slick and clean, make it a little bit longer. Yes, sir.
And we're talking about leaders, you talking about taper leaders, you talking about tie your own leaders.
So that is a question that we talk about a ton in the shop, and everybody's got an opinion on it. And I personally, and this is not to sell you tapered leaders. They're $5. By the time I talk about it for 20 minutes, I didn't make any money on something. It's not that. The reason that I would recommend buying a tapered leader and tying the bike tippet to it is everybody wants to tie their own leaders, which is cool. And I think knowing how to tie your own leaders is very beneficial. You should know how to do it. The thing I don't like about this, how many times you go and there's a little bit of seaweed, there's a little bit of grass, there's a little bit of something. And Just like on your kayak or your boat, anything that your fly line can get caught on your boat, it's absolutely going to. I feel the same way about a leader in the conditions. I could see a 40-inch snook swimming, and I lay my fly out, and I got a good shot at him, and I start to strip, and my second section of my leader had a blood knot on it, and it grabbed that little stupid piece of grass, and I'm out of the game. So to me, minimizing things to go wrong, the better. And to me, every little tagment of line on a leader is potentially something to go wrong. Not to say it couldn't happen on that end section, but there's only one of those, opposed to 60, 40, 30, 20, you know what I mean? It's like, come on. I mean, that's my opinion. There's a lot of people that know a lot more about this that would probably argue that, but that's my personal opinion. From, I'm not going to know the name of it, to be completely honest with you. It's like it's called a, I believe it's called an improved. Yes, it's like a figure 8 up through it, and then you do a stopper knot. That's my go-to knot for almost everything other than a crab fly for permit. Yeah, and I've never had that knot fail ever in my life. You had it fail? Yeah, you didn't do it right. It's what is it called? An improved permit? Homer Rose, thank you. Yeah, I always stumble on it. Yeah, and my buddy told me that. I had a friend of mine teach me that knot forever ago, and I've gotten to where anything that I want the fly to move, that's what I use, and I've never had it fail. Somebody else here may have had it fail, JT had it fail, but I've had really good luck with that.
There's a good video on the angling company website.
Oh, is that right? On that knot?
On that knot.
Oh, okay, cool. Do they recommend that knot?
Yeah, oh,
Okay,
yeah.
perfect. Cool. Yeah, I've had good success with that.
The angling company. Yeah.
Any other questions? I don't want to hold you guys up. I know everybody's got stuff to do. I'm more than happy to answer your questions, but I don't want to just steal your time either. So, yes, sir.
Do you think tides are critical, or is it as much the conditions?
I think I am a firm believer in silhouette is critical, size is critical, and where in the water column that is critical. But I think if you said, oh no, it's got to be bucktail, it's got to be buck. I don't think it's got to be
Tides. Tides.
Oh, tides. I thought you said tides. I'm so sorry. In the saltwater game, tides are critical. For beach snook, my experience is it's not a make or break deal on the beach. Anywhere near the passes, it changes a little bit, obviously because it affects that zone a little bit more. But my personal experience is I haven't seen a higher success rate of fishing snook on the beach on an incoming tide opposed to an outgoing if you're not near a pass. You know, I've had them because on the beach, I feel like with some wind, you get as much current with wind sometimes on the beach as you would a really strong tide somewhere. So my experience is I haven't watched it close enough to give you a very factual answer, but my gut instinct is I haven't personally noticed a big difference on the incoming, outgoing, or slack tide for beach snook. Beach tarpon, hands down, incoming tide if you're fishing them from the beach. They seem to swim tighter. Yeah. Somebody else here may have more experience in it that has a different opinion that I would definitely talk to, but that's my opinion. Is that all right?
Thank you, Jake. We're gonna have, yeah.
Listed at $25 on the hour. Please have a look at it.
6-weight fin, $25. We've got a raffle to do. Gene, you want to bring the bucket up here and we can do that up here. Also, we're going to have the outing at Jericho Bayou on the 15th, 8 a.m.
Yes.
We're going to try to reschedule the one from last month.
Ethan, will that be on the website?
It'll be on the email and on Jericho Bayou. It's up north in Brady. So we'll announce the raffle tickets, and then if you will, go line up over there. Okay, I'll announce the number. Let's see, that's my number. I got 8147. 8147. Okay, we've also got the fly rod raffle if you're in on that. After me. 8029. 47 going over and play your prize. 8029 is number 2. Okay. 8031. 8031. I don't have a lid on. Is yours at the top? I'm gonna go to the bottom. Yours one with glasses on. 8057. 8057. 8032. 80. That's probably somebody. Okay. 8032. 8051. 51.
Actually,
8161. 8161. 8094. 8094. Go over and get in line before somebody jumps in front of you. 8191. 8069. 8069. Do I have 8069 anywhere? All right, Mike. 8030. 8162. 8162. 8162. Anyone? Going once, going twice. 8138. 8138. Go for it. How many things you got? Still going? 8164. 8164. 8164. Guys, we're going to the Mandeville afterwards if y'all want to join us for a beverage and a hamburger. 8143. 8143. 8171. 8171. How many more things we got? 2 more numbers. 8048. 8048. 8090. 8090. Yep. And the final prize goes to 8065. 8065. 8065. All right, big winner tonight. I didn't draw my own one. Let's go to the fly rod, folks. Got a blue ticket, 0661. What? Fix. Is that what the last
I want to read that.